You know the Magna culture, right? Nobody works for me. You people work with me. I'm working for you. The history of mankind has always been dominated by the golden rule. Here's the gold makes the rule. But I don't want to be dominated by anyone. If I feel that strong, I should not be able to dominate somebody either.
Hello there, Richard Dolan, in a conversation with our very own Frank Stronach. This week, we're going to have a courageous conversation about the bureaucracy of bullying. You see, the news is widespread. The geopolitical events are unfolding, with the tariff war well underway between the sitting U.S. President Donald J. Trump and our very own Canadian government. Frank, what an incredible week. History in the making, would you not agree?
Well, it's always good that things move a bit, right? If things are very stale, then, that isn't very good. So it's great to get moving.
Of course.
And call it in life.
One can actually even assert that the person that makes all the movement and is the cause for the ruckus is likely he who has the gold. After all, I'm sitting with an advance copy, a draft edition of the very publishable works that you've got in store around the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities. Very exciting as it hits the press very, very soon. But I'm drawn to the statement you make where it reads, the history of mankind has always been dominated by the golden rule. The person who has the gold makes the rules. And you went on to say, not just across the interviews that you've been featured in, but you've said even recently, and in this book, it reads, and you say, I don't want to be dominated by anyone. And if I feel that strongly, I should not be able to dominate somebody either. So is it possible that as we watch these tariff wars unfold, not just between Canada, but other countries as well, is it possible to see that bureaucratic bullying of sorts is well underway?
I don't think I will call it bureaucratic bullying, because, Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and there are reasons why he is the president of the United States, that he said, look, the country doesn't function anymore. Everybody takes advantage of the United States, and I want to sort that out. And so I think our remarks should have been, well, let's define what you mean by taking advantage of America, right? And if it's so, then we really should correct it, right? Because I think we have been neighbors for many generations, right? And basically we've been good neighbors. But I see it more, the United States and Canada are the custodian of a free society. So it's very important we don't get tangled up or be so at each another. So we got to find solutions.
Well, and I love that you started by stating that it is within the rights of Donald Trump, President Trump, to be able to simply call time out. The American people have been taken advantage of, financially speaking. It's time that he levels the playing field. But it would appear to me it takes a strong-minded businessman to recognize when a country is being taken advantage of economically. Is this why you've been brilliant in the authoring of this new economic charter for Canadians? Would you say that because you've been a businessman, you too see the disadvantage that Canada has unfolding economically for itself?
Well, I'll go back to the statement where I said, the world has always been dominated by the golden rule, by the people who had the gold or the monies, they made the rules. And they still do. So basically, I call them the elite now, right? Because you don't see the kings no more. The elite, they might be in Hawaii, they might be in Beverly Hills, they might be in Monaco, but they're still there. And somewhere along the line, they think the public or the people are not reliable. You can manipulate them, and so they want to go. They don't really want to share the profits with the working class.
Well, and that sounds like it's one of the underpinnings to the argument that the U.S. government is making. President Trump levying tariffs, not just on Canada, but also Mexico and fellow trading partner China. When you look at these tariffs, would you agree with Warren Buffett when he deems tariffs as an act of war?
Well, I would not go to that far, right? I like, if there's some misunderstandings or different points of view, then you got to try to find a very civilized anytime when you have wars, guns, and et cetera, et cetera. So you will need it down. The very key is we have been good neighbors for so many generations, but most of all, as I stated early on, we are the custodian of a free society, the United States, and so I think the proper thing would have been for the Canadians to say, look, let's define where we have an advantage or we have preferences. Let's define that and let's sort that out. And together we should think, how can our people, Americans and Canadians, live peacefully side by side and have higher living standards. But the living standards, there's many other reasons why the living standards gone back in the United States as well as in Canada.
What I'm hearing you say, and it's interesting, as some would argue that the Trump administration is weaponizing its economic powers and its reach. What I'm hearing in you is a far more diplomatic approach to resolving differences, even if they are economic in imbalance. When I look at the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities, it sounds like another new conversation on how we can actually restabilize Canada's economic future and its current rating. Do you see there being a parallel or a difference between Trump and you?
It always boils down to the economy. It's the economy. And society came a long way, right? When we look back to the caveman, we came a great way. But we had the caveman at one time, and then we had the hunter and the hunted, and then we had the kings and the servants, and now we have the bosses and disgruntled employees. That's the key problem. So we got to make sure to have a different approach, right? So the key statement on the economic charter, or what the statements I made, was always, if the economy doesn't function, nothing else will function. All politicians, all business people agree, if the economy doesn't function, nothing else will function. We cannot feed the hungry. We cannot look after the most fragile people, the elderly, the sick, and the handicapped. But interestingly, we don't talk what drives the economy. It's the most important subject, and we totally ignore it. It's the economy. The economy is driven by three forces: smart managers, hardworking employees, and investors. Basically, all three have a right to the outcome, which is profits. The message I want to get across loud and clear is, without workers, you can't make a profit. So it's so logical. It's so much common sense. So I'm not preaching, let's take away from the rich. I'm saying we must let the workers participate. Let them participate. We can bake a big economic pie, and everybody will get a bigger slice. That's what it's all about.
It feels a lot more like rather than a great reset, it's more of a great equalization, an equalization of economic rights for Canadians. And I think that as we're using this particular time as a point of reference with what President Trump is doing with the tariffs currently now being levied against the Canadian marketplace, a great equalization of economic forces are important. I mean, Frank, it's amazing that people now are feeling the pinch of what it might mean to them. The groceries will go up, the cost of a car will go up, the cost of goods will go up, and it feels like it's existential, but it's financially driven. So a financial conversation, a courageous financial conversation, must take place in order to evoke change. This is what you're saying.
Well, what I'm saying is, what is the problem? What really is the problem? The problem is that we are overregulated. You know, we have more regulators now than people which want to make products, okay? So that's our case. So governments have grown too big. Huh? We are so far away. We're getting further and further away from a free society, right? Okay, and so the question was always free enterprise. There's no free enterprise anymore. We have so many regulators. So, but we also got to realize statements have been made over and over and over. Without free enterprise, you haven't got a free society. So that's the problem. The problem is the very rich don't want to share the profits with the working class.
Well, let's play a game, because this is just a conversation with Frank Stronach. Let's just play a game. Let's pretend we left this room and we walked into another room, and it was a time machine, and it took us back where you got to be running the company you founded, Magna, one of the world's largest auto part manufacturers on the planet. But the difference is you went back, but we were in today's times. Donald Trump is still president. At this time, Prime Minister Trudeau remains in power. How would you be viewing the current political landscape that Trump and Trudeau has served our economic landscape, the Canadian economic landscape? How would you be viewing? How would it be leaving you feeling as the head of Magna if you were running it today, Frank, given the current state of affairs?
This is a very serious conversation. We have to realize the United States was dominating the world for the last 150 years. About 50 years ago, when Wall Street reminded business or demanded from business, you got to make more profits. And on the other hand, you had the unions, which say, we need higher wages. So business took the easy way out. They went to China with all the technologies. So the United States is not dominating the world anymore. There might be very serious situations coming up, because when you be in Moscow or in Beijing, when they show the capitalistic world how the people live, right? They don't show how people live in Beverly Hills. They show how people live in the Bronx, in New York, right? Or in Chicago, in Detroit, in the slums. I mean, it's beyond thing here. It's enormous. Okay, so they say to their people, "Do you want to live like that? This is where the lower class lives." Okay, so that's what we have to. That's what we have to realize. There is a thing now. Basically, it boils down to two economic systems. The one is the China-Russian system. And we have to realize about 10% of their populations are the military. And there's another 10% which are the super bureaucrats. So what we have is that 20% of the people control the 80% in precise terms. Don't step across those lines, right? They're reasonable, well-fed, right? Reasonable thing, but there's no question that 20%, they rule the thing here, and the system allows practically for no freedom. But then we have the American system, the capitalistic system. This approximately now, the statistics were about 1% of the United States people hold about 50% of all the wealth. So we can say we have 1% in the United States, which tell 99% of the people what's good for them. You got all the freedom. They say, what do you want? You got all the freedom. You got the freedom to be hungry. The kid in inner city Detroit the economic freedom thing has no great bearing. It's free to be hungry. Okay, so that's why it's so important that we also need a fairness in the economy. Okay, in essence, over and over I'm saying, without workers we can't make a profit. Let's get them involved, and their thinking starts differently. They're on the front lines. They know how to make things better, and that was the secret of Magna, right? We had an economic charter of rights at Magna, right? The economic charter of rights basically was the shareholders get 20% of the profits, the workers get 10% of the profits over and above their wages, management gets 6% of the profits, and 7% goes into research, and 2% goes to charity. So the rest was reinvested. That is really, and Magna came a long way, right, from a garage up to 180,000 employees. So it's a role model. We could just copy that, okay? There's no magic. Everybody won. The shareholders won, the employees won, management won, society won.
And just a footnote for those who are watching and listening, to galvanize your point, you're not only right, you've remained right. Magna has a market cap of over $30 billion. So it continues to make a difference in society, philanthropic impact, contributing to causes and charities. But the shareholders still make money, and also the employees, and also management. So it's interesting to notice that if we took a fair and bipartisan view, there are some parts of the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and what it stands for that maybe the Trump administration also embodies. I'll point out one. The first is to balance the budget and eliminate the debt. Just last night, we heard President Trump deliver his first State of the Union. And one of the key things he said was, and I want to make sure I don't sound like I'm pro or against Trump, I'm just making an observation, is that he wants to eliminate the U.S. deficit by the time his term is up. That's a very noble cause. That sounds like a responsible cause. Do you sense that there are some parts of Trump that actually reflect some of the thinking that's inside of your new Charter of Canadian Economic Rights, Frank?
Well, I met Trump quite a few times and spent a lot of time with him, right? And he is a no-nonsense businessman. The only one thing we disagree with him, he hasn't shared the profits yet with his employees, and neither did Musk. But it's, they might not be aware of it, right? That you could make more monies when you share the profits, right? Because, again, we always go to an evolutionary process, right? We change things as we go along, and they say, let's try it. Does that work better? Okay. So that's really, I do hope that, if, the laws of nature are much stronger than any man-made law. In nature, when a species does not reproduce itself, another species will take over. The capitalistic species is not reproducing itself. There's less and less capitalists every day. So again, the message I want to get across, we got to make capitalists out of the workers. It's a species which does reproduce itself, okay? Because as we go along, maybe in 50 years, there might only be 10 capitalists in the world, okay? So we want to avoid that, right? So the Economic Charter of Rights basically says companies below 300 employees, they should operate under the capitalistic system or the free enterprise system because it's the best way of creating wealth. Because the socialistic and capitalistic systems, they're not creating wealth. They're creating distributing wealth. First, you got to create it. Otherwise, there's none to distribute. China is a little different. China has forced labor. They can, they can say, look, you guys got to do that or else, right? But the very key still is The capitalistic system needs harnessing when you get larger, because you could wind up. It's another form of kingdom, right? And there were revolutions. We wanted to get, there were good kings and bad kings, etc. But people don't want to be dominated. Okay, it's in our nature not to be dominated. So we could have, that's what I'm saying, we could easily, via the Economic Charter of Rights, it's a roadmap to economic freedom and, most of all, to eliminate poverty.
You know, what resonates with me, especially this time in the current moment we're in, our country, with the economic debates and debacles that are happening on both sides of the border, is you've once said this to me, Frank, and I want to share it one more time with you, is that in order for there to be an evolution, there must be first a revolution of the mind. And what I'm now finally seeing is that a revolution of a mind is really a shift of the mindset. If we shift the mindset, we shift the conversation. But the only way there could be an evolution, what I'm hearing you say, is if we really embrace the crucible moment we're in, where things have to change. Things have got to be adopted, edited, or omitted. In other words, Trump might just be the right thing to have happened to the geopolitical environment to just shake things up, to maybe start from scratch, to perhaps start with a vision and follow a blueprint that really resets the equilibrium for people. Would you agree that this evolution it starts with the revolution of mind? Is that what we're seeing unfold right now?
Well, I think it's absolute necessary, right? For instance, just to have not balanced budgets. That means you make debt every year. It's like leaving a gigantic mortgage for the future generation. Okay, it's practically irresponsible. Okay, and so that's nice to hear from Trump that he wants to eliminate the debt, because the debt is call it the worst amongst everything here, right? Without that, you get deeper and deeper in the hole, right? Okay, so that's the number one thing we gotta eliminate, and that's why when you let workers participate, then society gets more productive. Okay, then we can pay back the debt and then prevent not to have that anymore. So workers' participation and got to make capitalists out of workers. You can't have a capitalistic system if the workers not being part of the capitalists.
Well, I love what you just said, and I want to underscore it, where when you're turning everyday workers into capitalists, not just in mind, but in their pocket, it lends to the statement you make in this advanced copy I have right before me. I mean, before it goes to press, one of the wonderful statements you said here was, and I quote, "The three most urgent tasks we need to address are the following. Number one, reduce regulations." Again, very similar to what Donald Trump has been doing in his first 100 days of office. And I see that now as proof of what he believes he should be shifting. You say here to simplify the tax system and balance the budget so that, and I love this part, so that we don't mortgage the future and burden generations of tomorrow. What do you mean by mortgaging the future, Frank?
Well, it's when you can't balance your budget and you create debt every year, right? I mean, the more debt you're going to create, the more difficult. There's an old saying, the deeper you get into the hole, right? Okay, to how to climb out. So that this is the same, it's similar like, when let's say you have a couple, right, which have 2 kids, and maybe they have a house, and they have a mortgage on it of $1 million, but the house, the realistic value is maybe only $500,000. So would the kids keep the house? Okay. They would walk away, right? Because look, it's It's only we obligated now to pay $1 million, but if the state has that, you can't walk away. So the kids would be, their living standard would deteriorate, right? And that's why society sometimes rise, get lazy, and deteriorate, huh? Okay, so that's what we have, right? We got lazy, we got
maybe complacent, maybe we got comfortable.
Yeah, too complacent, lazy, complacent, and to and to say, look, the state will look after you. Okay, we got to realize the state can't give you anything unless they take it away from you in the first place. And in that process, they would waste maybe 80%. We got to realize that. That's a natural law.
Yeah. I'm smiling over here in this conversation with you because it also now just strikes me as completely appropriate that you're the right person to have, in fact, authored this Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities. Because for those who've admired you over the several decades and given your success at Magna, you were born to find efficiencies in a business in the spirit of scaling it. Would you not agree? Now scaling it though, right, Frank? And I'm looking at you saying yes. I wanted to complete the thought. In scaling it, you're looking for the deficiencies, the places in which a factory is not efficient. So you've trained your brain and you've perfected your craft and you've honed your intuition on understanding how we can run, scale, automate, and produce great products for great profits for all to share. You took that same line of thinking and you're applying it to our country. I see that as the parallel. Do you?
Yes, there's more to it than that, right? The very key is...
Well, that's why I'm interviewing you, and you're the smart one over there.
The very key is anything large, right, is, let's say, a monopoly. Monopolies are a curse to society. Might those be state monopolies or private monopolies? So we must do everything we can to eliminate, but we're well on the way to have, call it semi-monopolies. They're not quite thing here, and that's the problem, right? And so I think the reason why Magna was so successful was we had a total decentralized system. The emphasis was on the management, right? And I thought the ideal cutoff point was 300 employees per factory, right? Okay. So, and we gave the management the opportunity to run under the corporate umbrella if they thought it was an advantage. But they could stay outside of the corporate umbrella when they thought it was a disadvantage. Let me give you a practical example, right? We up Magna, up at head office, we are one of the largest buyers of steel in the world, right? Thousands of tons we buy, and plastic and packaging material, etc., right? But I did not demand that managers had to buy the steel from someone which was the cheapest price, right? So no manager had the excuse to say, I didn't perform because up in head office, some bureaucrats in head office up there demanded I did XXX, buy from a source. A manager would say the price was all right, but the delivery was bad. That's why my customer is unhappy. The next time he would say the price was okay, the delivery was okay, but the quality was bad. There's always something. So we always left it to his main mandate was keep the employees happy. They're happy if the company makes profits and they get bonuses, and they keep the customer happy. Those were at the end, and make the most money and don't be influenced by anybody else. A manager could not be fired if he didn't break the law, and he could also be fired if for 2 years it doesn't make a profit. Okay, so it's a very unique system. But let me give you a kind of a funny, not funny, but a really great.
A perfect example.
A perfect example. I had managers which they came to me, Frank, I want to make more money, so I want to make more, get a bigger bonus. Well, I said, that's nice to hear. It's nice to hear that people want to do that. And I said, look, there should be no problem if you be smart. Well, he says, I'm smart, I'm making money, so I'm in my factory, don't I? Yeah, it's pretty smart, but you could be smarter. Well, he says, look, you limit me, I cannot have more than 300 employees. If I would have more employees, I would make more monies. I said, that's what you think, you would not be. But again, you're not listening to me. I said, you got to be smarter. So finally he says, what do you recommend? Well, I said, look, if you be really smart, why don't you replace yourself? You groom the assistant manager to be the manager. And you, because you've created something great now, you get a cut from the old factory. And you get the monies to build the new factories. I had, let's say, managers replace themselves maybe 10 times. They maybe made about $10 million a year. That's pretty more than a lawyer, most lawyers would make, or accountants. So if you stay in the trades, right, you could make more monies because you produce things. In the final analysis, the countries which are producing things have the highest living standards.
Well, and that's important, because if there's anyone that understands and appreciates living standards, is an employer who sees every day their employees and the state of mind they are in, the state of health they are in, and the state and quality of attention they bring, because there is a direct relationship between your economic success and their economic success, which begs the question, why are people so upset when billionaires provide a business mind and approach to causing an evolution, or may I say catalyzing a revolution in our economic charters and perhaps even our politics and our policies? In other words, I think your mindset's exactly what's needed to disrupt the complacency in society and its structures. Would you agree?
Yes, but it's again, it has something to do with evolutions, different situations, right? And I said early on once, I said a number of times, because it's for a lot of people very difficult to understand how can one person in a lifetime create over 400 factories and 180,000 employees, right? So again, I have to repeat that over and over. So when I started out as a toolmaker at a small company in Toronto, about 10 employees, and the owner said, gee, Frank, you're doing a great job. I want you to be a partner of mine. It was nice to hear. My chest swelled a little. But he was a nice guy, but he never wrote it down, huh? Okay? And that happens over and over, right? So but I said to myself, look, there's nothing to run the business. I looked in the papers, got a job where I made a lot more monies. I rented a small room. The showers and the toilets were out on the hallway. And so I rented a small building and bought a few used machineries, and out I went hustling, right? I walked in the factories and said, gee, I'm very good in solving problems. If you can't solve them, you don't have to pay me. And a lot of the business owner, I want to show that young guy is not that smart. He doesn't, but anyway, I was smart. After 1 month, I hired somebody. After a year, 10 people, and then after 2 years, 20 people. And this is a critical point where most people miss it. Okay? I noticed my foreman was a little different, a German fellow by the name of Herman. I said, Herman, what's the matter with you lately? Well, he said, Frank, I've been thinking of starting my own business. I said, I sympathize with that. But I said, let's talk tomorrow. Maybe we have a better answer, okay, a better solution. It's always, you got to look for better solutions. That evening I was talking to myself, and it was, if that foreman's going to leave me, that would stifle my growth. I don't like that. The next reason I liked even less. If that foreman's going to leave me, I would got to do all the work myself. I liked it even less. So my third reason was, if I hire a new foreman and I don't show him how business is, I still got to do all the work. And if I show him how business is run, then he will leave. So basically I came to, well, I should make him as a partner, a good person, and together we make more money. So the next day I said to my foreman, look, why don't we open up a new factory? You own 1/3, I own 2/3. And he said, you mean it? I said, yes. We went right away to a lawyer, wrote it down. That was his factory. The guy was hustling. He was so proud. So over the next 2 years, I took the next foreman, the next foreman, the next foreman, right? And I say, gee, business is easy, okay? We are cash flowed like monies. But then I became more philosophical, more sentimental.
Maybe more reflective.
Yeah, more reflective. The times I was hungry, the times the poverty, and so on. Look.
But do you find, Frank, I'm being rude to interrupt because I'm curious to lean in on here, and I think our listeners would be too. Do you feel like as you achieved greater success and as you matured, I wouldn't say dare getting older because you're actually in better shape than me, but as you got more mature, you valued different things differently. Would you agree?
Yeah, I was exposed to different situations, right? This usually you are what you're exposed to, right? And sometimes, we might miss an opportunity, right? We might, or it's very difficult for a small company to say, gee, I'm going to share the profits, right? Because you don't make that much, right? So but it was an example, right, which I just, when I started to reason and said, look, do I come up with a better solution? So the very key is, if we let workers participate, right, you trigger an energy of under proportions, okay? Because they're on the front line. Mm-hmm. They know, they can see things. And it comes down, a company which could make a better product for a better price will could be the largest company, but I did not let them, I had an association with small companies.
Well, let me pause you there because you covered the monopoly conversation. I think you were very good at exercising your influence for accountability. That's what I've learned. You were also very sympathetic. Even when I look at this advanced copy of the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities, you wrote in here that there's a vision you have for a minimum standard of economic freedom. Every standard begins with a vision. And the vision you have for every Canadian is that after a Canadian has worked for 30 years, and I quote you, they should be able to own their own house or condo, mortgage-free. They should have at least $300,000 in savings to supplement their pensions so that they can choose their own road to happiness during their retirement years. Well, when did you come up with that vision, those numbers, that parameter?
Well, it's, most of the time, you hear motherhood statements, right? With no backup, no thing here. If you make a statement, you say, what's the minimum? Okay? What's the minimum standards we should have, right? Okay, so the minimum would be, if a Canadian man or Canadian woman work for 30 years, they should own their own home, might it be a small one or a condo, mortgage-free, and should have $300,000 in the bank so they could supplement their pensions and choose their own road to happiness for the later years. It's a shame that our senior citizens live in poverty and live in fear to be hungry, huh? So we have advanced with technology and we gone backwards, right? Because we overregulate.
Well, I think regulation as much as it will require some courageous and precise acts of power from politicians. What I love about the Canadian Economic Charter that you've authored is that it's a vision. That's what I'm getting to. You had a vision for those who worked for you around the world, a minimum standard of achievement, a minimum standard of debt-freedness, so that they had a minimum standard of freedom of personal rights and choice and power. And I think that that's not only courageous and not only creative, but I think that was very compassionate of you, Frank.
It is, luckily, most people are born with a conscience, right? Where some, if you don't do things right, it bothers you, okay? And then when you get, like I said early on, when you be younger, you hustle to make some monies that you can live in dignity. And when you get older, you do sit back a bit and say, sometimes on a weekend when I went for a walk on my farm, I had a forest where I sit down on a tree stump or on a stone and count my blessings that you do get. Say, can you make a contribution to a better world? And I think it's so important to have a purpose. To have a purpose. Can you supplement that people have a better life? The living standards are higher.
We're going to get philosophical in the tail end of our conversation, if you don't mind, because I've really just enjoyed a conversation with you today. You hit two really important terms, conscience, and you hit purpose. And these are both very large conversations for anybody at any age or stage in their life. But let me start with the first and maybe the easier one. Frank, given where you are today as a celebrated billionaire, a self-made entrepreneur, someone who's employed hundreds of thousands of people, has impacted countless industries around the world, do you feel your purpose today is different from what it was when you first started Magna?
No, when I started out, my drive, my desire was never to be hungry anymore. I had no other thing. That was my okay. And then when you're not hungry anymore, then you lean back and say, "Gee, do you remember when you were hungry? Do you want to see people being hungry?" It's a very eerie feeling, right? If you have the ability to bring about change, you don't do anything. Okay, so it's so that comes at the first desire, the first things you gotta do. You gotta stay healthy yourself. If you're not healthy, you cannot be of any help to anybody, right? So the number one. That's why I'm always saying to the students, focus on the day to stay alive, but leave the door open and follow your dreams.
I love that.
And be guided by your conscience. So that is really, you gotta stay alive. You gotta, if you be hungry, if you cannot help anybody. And the more money, so the more thing of greater help you could be, right? And there are good rich people which are very, but they might not have connected yet. What can you do? It's like, the old saying is, if you give people a fish, you feed them for a day, but teach them how to fish, you feed them for a life, right? So we have been missing that, huh? Yes, we have. There's quite a few good which give, but they've been missing the boat. We got to let them participate when we bake the economic pie. And we gotta realize, they're entitled, everybody would get a bigger slice. Even the rich would get richer. But let the workers get rich too.
Maybe you're touching on my next question, which is what weighs heavy? What weighs heavy on Frank Stronach's conscience right now at this stage and age in your life? What weighs heavy on your conscience?
Well,
is there something that keeps you up at night?
Yes, I mean, of course, I think about, and And I knew when I had to go into more solutions. Usually what you read in newspapers, columns or what, they only write that's the status. That's what it is now. A lot of debt, the living standards are deteriorating, but you don't read anything how to overcome that, huh? Okay. And so when I got into more, especially on the tax system, right? The tax system is so convoluted, right? And really, the way I break it down, we don't need tax specialists, right? When a high school student should be able to fill out the income tax form, right? Okay, so that means there's hundreds of thousands of specialists would be. But I do. The economic charter does say, look, we gotta bring changes in a civilized way. In a civilized country, every citizen got the right to find a job, whatever the openings are. It's the system which is wrong. But to be civilized, I'm recommending, let's fire the bureaucrats. Let's have a hiring freeze. Huh? That's the key part that changes have to come. Changes will come. If changes are not coming, the communistic regime will dominate. The rich will lose everything. Okay?
So I'm going to come at you from a different angle because it feels like we're coming right back to the top of the conversation. We started today talking about living in the wake of Trump tariffs. And Elon Musk, who's the world's richest man, has been responsible for a department of government efficiency. They call this the Doge department. And he's been highly criticized for firing a lot of parts of varying departments within the U.S. government. But I feel like that thinking is aligned with your ideology. Do you agree with some of what Musk's doing?
Yes, but I'm saying, look, it's not their fault. It's the fault of the very financial elite. Okay, so you don't have to come in with the chainsaw. Just to be hiring freeze, right? But we gotta have a vision, or we gotta to get in. We need certain structures, and really we just follow the laws of nature, right? Certain things you gotta change.
Well, this is why you write in this advanced copy of the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights, and I quote you, and I love this. It reads, "I am not advocating that we take from the rich. What I'm proposing is that we must allow workers to participate in baking the economic pie, and that workers have a moral right to a slice of that pie." What I love about that is it's not just, hey, I want my part too. You're saying, no, give them the equal co-authorship, the co-production, the co-baking. Give them equal right of accessing their own fair share of work.
There's no equal rights, right? There's some have greater input, some have things. You got to allow for that. To some people, let everybody find their own road to happiness. Like if you say, look, I'm very happy to go in the forest and watch birds or butterflies, let it be. Let it be. So there is no. It's gotta be identified that you have more input, that you're smarter, and society could not. You see, there is now amongst the young people, it's sort of that it doesn't matter what you do, you're not making headways, huh? We gotta give to the young people again. Look, I want to be like such and such a guy. Look at he's got the latest cars now. He's got the thing here. Everybody wants to have a better shirt or a better jacket, better shoes, a better bike, a better thing. Yeah, it's in the human nature, right? And some might say, look, I don't really care. I don't really let it be, right? You cannot. So there is standards, right? And the standards are let the smaller company be totally free enterprise with practically no rules and regulations. Two rules must apply: workplace safety and the environment, right? But otherwise, there should be no tax inspector in there, because small business will pay no tax, right? Let small business is the key is the key to the economy.
Well, I'm only smiling because I have a admiring curiosity that when you say young people, and I know that listeners and our viewers want to know, at 92 years young, how do you define young people? Because I'm hopeful that you're going to point my direction, but I know you don't mean me.
Well, yeah, man, it's how young is your mind, right? And you should, like, I mean, there are laws of nature, right? One is you are what you eat. You got to be very careful, and then you gotta do some activities. You got to constantly think, how can what does it take to stay healthy, good mind, and most of all, to enjoy it, right?
Well, on that note, and I think as we wind down with a final question, it brings me back to one of the great insights I gained from you, because we've been talking today about tariffs, what President Trump has been declaring, not war, but has been catalyzing change on both sides of the border and geopolitically. We've talked a bit about your Canadian Charter of Rights and some of the underpinnings given what we found in your advanced reading copy. But you cited the terms purpose and conscience, and we touched on them both. But if you were to hear someone describe Frank Stronach's purpose today, what would you want being heard in the world and echoing in eternity, my dear friend, as Frank Stronach's purpose on its way to being fulfilled today? We know you fulfilled your original purpose, which was to never go hungry again. But today, what would you describe and hope that it's being said to have been fulfilled? What's Frank Stronach's purpose today?
On my gravestone, I want to have, it was a good mensch.
He was a good mensch. He was a good mensch. And when you say a good mensch, what does that mean to you?
Well, a good mensch means to be considerate, to be aware how other people live, good or bad,
Could you be defined?
And to be helpful in, even if I think that you give a certain portion, even if not totally full yet, right? You still could give a slice away to somebody hungry, okay?
You remind me of the closing scene, and I know this might be considered controversial. It might be edgy. It's just a reflection I currently am having personally. But I watched a movie once long ago called Schindler's List. And in the movie, there's a main character, Mr. Schindler himself, where he was rescuing children from the ravages of Hitler's domination. Yeah. And what he did was he was pawning and selling off all of his worldly possessions to give him the currency of saving a child, 2, 3, and many. In the closing scene, he looked down exhausted and he found something on his wrist. It was something he thought, oh my goodness, I could have sold this just to save yet another person, another life. Do you feel an eerie similarity for yourself, 92 years young, that there's still so much to do and so much to get to?
Well, it's when you be younger, look, anytime you want to change the system, some people might be upset and the thing here, and I get some dirt thrown against me. Do I like it? Of course I don't like it, but would I change what my conscience tells me? No, right? And it gives me a lot of hope, and it gives me a lot of thing here that I'm doing the right thing. And most of all, I do hope that I still would say that the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights will adopt it in our Constitution. I hope to witness that, but I know if I don't, I opened the door. You can never close it anymore. It will come, okay? Because it's the law of nature.
I want you to try something on, as if I was about to put a jacket on you to see if it fits and if you like it. You ready for this? It's just a matter of phraseology. But here's what I've heard, and I'll say this in closing for this conversation with you, my dear friend Frank Stronach, is I believe that it took you a lifetime to devise a plan to remove the hunger from your belly. And it came in the form of Magna. Thanks to your mother, who had the courage and commitment as your guardian to take you by hand at the age of 14 to the largest employer in town and turned you into a tool and die apprentice. That understudy gave rise to not only your education, but it fortified your skill set, your prowess, and your mastery, understanding not just business, but understanding the laws of efficiency, the laws of sustainability, the laws of profit, loss, and a collective gain. It took you a lifetime to realize all of these underpinnings of what makes things work is when you work them. And I believe that the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities is your magnum opus, your greatest life's work that came at the expense of Magna, which wasn't a cost, it was a beautiful life's investment, and it produced thousands of jobs and created an incredible industry that has echoed for generations to come, beyond both our times here on Earth. What I'm willing to say, my friend, and I want to see if you agree, is that this is work of your finest in your greatest hour of life. It's a vision for the Canadian economy. It's a vision for economic sovereignty. And more importantly, it came at the 92 years of experience, trial, and tribulation that you afforded this publication, this vision, this blueprint. That, I believe, is your final purpose. Would you agree?
Yeah, of course. I mean, because I think to a certain extent I've been blessed with a good mind. And I realized if I would have gotten more specific, because at Magna I had a few 100,000 shareholders, it would have affected that thing that I say, Frank, you got to wait till you have practically no more responsibility, So I reached a point, right, where I have very little responsibility, and that I can do what I think has to be done, because I knew I would have gotten some poison arrows, right, and thing here, right, and the shame about it is it's totally contrary what I am, because I've always looked for justice and fairness, and I created the unique thing about Magna is it's got the most advanced human resource structure, right? As we all know, finances, the capital needs auditing from time to time, right? On a yearly basis, right? Or constantly. We've also developed an auditing process for the human capital, and that's our strength, because it was always, if workers are not happy, if you don't do things right, that makes workers unhappy. Unhappiness is contagious. If you got unhappy workers, there's no way you can make a quality product at a competitive price. And we got to realize that Magna, the labor force, was about 1/3 women. So about 60,000, we employed about 60,000 women, right? And it's sometimes difficult for women to go to a workplace, and so it's the key is, can you keep the workplace free and happy, okay, and your life free and happy, right? So it's
I love that.
It's one of the things here which which I'm a little sad about it, but on the other hand, it gives me my spirit gets motivated, and I say you're on the right track.
Well, I think in closing, because you are indeed a good mensch, my friend, as an old Italian proverb once said that the quickest way through into a man's heart is through the belly. And I think in our case, the quickest way through into the Canadian economic freedom of rights in the future is through the wallet. We thank you for your vision. We thank you for the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights, and I know there's more conversation to come.
Okay, great, Richard.
Such a treat to hang out with you and have this kind of conversation.
Let's carry on.
We'll continue.
Have a few more interesting subjects. There's so many subjects out there.
Well, you heard it from Frank Stronach himself. There's only so much time and so little wine to last us through a courageous conversation with our dear friend, Frank Stronach. Until next time, we'll see you then.